Aberdeen Tank Museum, Maryland, 1997. The afternoon light slanted through tall windows, casting long shadows across polished concrete. Colonel William Bill Harrington moved slowly among the hulking metal giants, his weathered hand occasionally brushing across cold steel. At 75, his once powerful frame had diminished, but his eyes remained sharp beneath bristling, white eyebrows. Those eyes had seen war. Those eyes had seen death. Those eyes had seen victory. Behind him trailed Jimmy, his 12-year-old grandson, attention darting between exhibits, the boundless energy of youth barely contained. Most visitors flocked to the massive Sherman tanks or the imposing Tiger Warren captured in North Africa. But Harrington bypassed them all, making his way toward a smaller vehicle sitting mostly ignored in the far corner. "This is it, Jimmy," Harrington said, his voice low but clear. "This is why your grandfather is still alive today." He placed his hand on the olive-drab hull, the touch reverent. People called it Hell Kitten, but for the men who served in them, it was something else entirely. "It looks," Jimmy searched for a polite word. "Small, weak," Harrington chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "That was its advantage, son. Nobody expected much from the Hell Kitten. That's what made it deadly." He guided Jimmy around the vehicle, pointing out features with the expertise of someone who had lived with the machine. Open turret gave us visibility. Small profile made us harder to spot. And that 75mm howitzer? It could put the fear of God into anything it hit if you knew how to use it. Jimmy studied his grandfather's face, seeing something there he rarely witnessed. A fierce pride mixed with profound sadness. "I want to tell you a story, Jimmy. The real story. Not the one in the history books." Harrington's voice dropped lower. "About how this little machine saved thousands of lives. About how a group of misfits turned a failed project into one of the most effective weapons of the war." As Harrington spoke, the museum around them seemed to fade, giving way to memory, to history, to the past that never truly releases its grip on those who have lived through fire. Aberdeen Proving Ground, September 1942. Second Lieutenant William Harrington stood at attention, the Maryland sun beating down mercilessly on his crisp uniform. At 20 years old, his face still carried the softness of youth, though the determined set of his jaw suggested the man he would become. Before him stretched the dusty testing field of Aberdeen Proving Ground, a seemingly endless expanse of dirt tracks and firing ranges. "At ease, Lieutenant," said Colonel Richard Summers, a heavy-set man with a perpetual scowl. "You understand why you've been summoned here?" "No, sir," Harrington replied honestly. "You were top of your class in mechanical engineering at Michigan before you enlisted, correct?" "Yes, sir. Was planning to work for Ford after graduation. Then Pearl Harbor happened." Summers nodded, already walking toward a large hangar. "Your country needs your brain more than your trigger finger right now, son." Inside the cavernous structure, teams of engineers and mechanics swarmed around various vehicles. Summers led Harrington to the far end of the hangar, where a tarp covered a smaller vehicle. With a theatrical flourish, Summers yanked the canvas away. "Lieutenant Harrington, meet the T-47. Harrington stared at the odd-looking machine before him. It resembled a light tank, but where a normal turret would be, an open-top structure housed what appeared to be a howitzer. The configuration looked awkward, unbalanced. "Based on the M5 Stuart chassis," Summers continued, "we've mounted a 75mm pack howitzer in a fully traversing turret, designed to provide close artillery support for infantry and armored units." Harrington walked slowly around the machine, his engineer's eye noting details, calculating angles, assessing design choices. "With all due respect, sir, this looks problematic." "Precisely the assessment our initial testers made," Summers nodded, "which is why this project is about to be scrapped." "Then why am I here, sir?" "Because someone upstairs thinks this concept still has merit. They've given us 30 days to fix it or abandon it forever. You're here because you understand both engineering and tank warfare. You're here because everyone else has given up on this ugly little bastard." From the shadows emerged a tall, gaunt man in civilian clothes, his shirt stained with grease and his wireframe glasses sitting slightly askew on his narrow face. "It's not a death trap," the man said, his voice surprisingly deep for his slender build. "It just needs refinement." "Lieutenant Harrington, meet Charles Miller, our chief engineer on this project," Summers said. "Miller, this is the hotshot lieutenant I told you about." Miller extended a hand covered in calluses and engine grease. "Lieutenant, what do you really think of her?" Harrington glanced at Colonel Summers, then back to the expectant engineer. "Honestly, I think she's a coffin with tracks. Thin armor, top heavy, crew exposed. Any German 88 would cut through this like butter. Rather than appearing offended, Miller nodded vigorously. Yes, yes, all true if you're thinking of it as a tank. But it's not a tank, Lieutenant. It's a completely different animal. Then what is it? Harrington asked. It's the weapon we need right now, came a new voice. A broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s approached, wearing Master Sergeant stripes. His weathered face spoke of years in the field, and a faded scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline. Master Sergeant Henry Thompson, the man introduced himself. Most call me Doc, was a field medic in the last war before I became a tank mechanic. I've been telling these pencil pushers that the battlefield has changed, Doc said, eyeing Colonel Summers without deference. Germans are fielding heavier armor than anything we've got. Our standard-issue anti-tank guns can't penetrate their frontal armor at combat ranges. And you think this hell kitten is the answer? Harrington asked, skepticism evident. It could be, Miller insisted. The 75mm howitzer can be loaded with a new type of high-explosive anti-tank round we're developing. Lower velocity than a standard anti-tank gun, but the shape charge doesn't rely on kinetic energy for penetration. Mobility is its true advantage, Doc added. It can get into position quickly, fire, and disappear before enemy artillery can zero in. Hit and run. Lieutenant, Miller said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I've spent 2 years on this project. The brass wants to kill it, divert resources to bigger tanks, more firepower. But we're going to need these in Europe. Intelligence reports suggest the Germans are deploying Tiger tanks with armor our current weapons can barely scratch. If this project fails, Summers interjected, you go back to training recruits at Fort Knox, no harm done. But if you succeed, we might save thousands of American lives, Doc finished. Harrington looked from face to face, then back to the awkward little vehicle. When do I start? You already have, Summers replied. For the next 30 days, this hangar is your home. This machine is your mission. Make it work or kill it for good. After Summers departed, Miller pulled Harrington aside, his voice low. There's something else you should know, Lieutenant. Something not in the official reports. What's that? Miller withdrew a crumpled letter from his pocket. My son, David, is with the 1st Armored Division in North Africa. His last letter described German tanks that our weapons couldn't penetrate. He's out there facing these monsters with inadequate equipment. The engineer's voice cracked slightly. This isn't just an assignment for me. It's personal. Harrington nodded slowly, understanding the weight that had just been placed on his shoulders. The next morning, Harrington arrived at the hangar before dawn, determined to understand every aspect of the M8. For several hours, Doc guided him through every component, explaining the design compromises and engineering challenges. The fundamental problem, Doc explained as they examined the turret, is weight distribution. The howitzer and recoil system are too heavy for the front suspension. Fires fine when stationary, but move after firing, and you're fighting the steering all the way. By midday, they were joined by 2 younger soldiers. Private First Class Danny Reeves, a skinny 19-year-old with a pronounced Kentucky accent who would serve as driver, and Private Jack O'Connor, an 18-year-old former collegiate shooting champion, assigned as gunner. Where's the loader? Harrington asked after introductions. That's our current problem, Miller admitted. Previous loader requested transfer after the last test firing incident. Incident? Recoil system failure, Doc explained tersely. Breech block nearly took his arm off. Before Harrington could respond, Colonel Summers entered, accompanied by a tall African-American soldier who carried himself with quiet dignity. Lieutenant Harrington, your final crew member, Summers announced, his tone suggesting he disapproved of the arrangement. Private First Class Elijah Washington, transferred from the Engineers Corps. Any experience with artillery? Harrington asked after returning Washington's perfect salute. No, sir, but I was studying mechanical engineering at Howard University before I enlisted. Worked summers at an auto shop in Baltimore. The racial implications hung uncomfortably in the air. In 1942, the Army remained segregated, with most African-American soldiers relegated to service and support roles rather than combat positions. Thank you, Colonel, Harrington said firmly. Private Washington sounds exactly like what this project needs. After Summers departed, an awkward silence fell over the group. At ease, Private. We've got work to do, Harrington said. Ever work with hydraulic systems? Yes, sir. Specialized in them, in fact. Good, because our recoil system has a nasty habit of trying to kill its operators. Think you can take a look? The next few hours revealed Washington's technical skill as he methodically disassembled the problematic recoil system. The buffer spring is overcompressed, Washington finally announced, and the hydraulic cylinder is undersized for the recoil force. It's fighting physics and losing. Can it be fixed? Miller asked. Yes, sir, but not with the current parts. We'd need to redesign the entire assembly. Something with progressive resistance, like the suspension system on the new Ford trucks, Harrington finished, seeing where Washington's thoughts were headed. For the first time since arriving at Aberdeen, Harrington felt a flicker of genuine hope for the project. That night, Miller visited Harrington's quarters with a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. Thought you might need this, the engineer said. First day on a doomed project deserves a drink. After a thoughtful sip, Harrington asked, Tell me honestly, do you believe in this machine? Miller was silent for a long moment. I believe in its potential, but more than that, I believe in necessity. He reached into his pocket and withdrew another letter from his son. The closing paragraph, untouched by the censor's pen, was devastatingly simple. Dad, I don't know if you can do anything about this where you are, but we need better weapons. The men are brave, but courage doesn't stop German armor. Please, if there's anything you can do. Harrington handed the letter back, his resolve hardening. We have 30 days, right? 29 now, Miller corrected with a grim smile. Then we'd better get to work. The next morning brought the first major test of the M8. Colonel Summers had arranged a demonstration for members of the tank board, a group of senior officers whose approval would be crucial for the project's survival. The test course included steep hills, water obstacles, and a firing range with targets at varying distances. Initially, the vehicle performed admirably, climbing grades and traversing obstacles with nimble agility. Harrington began to feel cautious optimism as they approached the water obstacle, a 4-foot deep trench filled with muddy water. Ease into it, he instructed Reeves, nice and steady. The M8 descended into the water smoothly, but as it began to climb the opposite bank, the front-loaded weight of the howitzer caused the tracks to lose traction. The vehicle slid backward, tilting alarmingly as it settled at an angle in the trench. After 3 attempts, Harrington had to admit defeat on this obstacle. The firing demonstration initially went better, with O'Connor displaying exceptional marksmanship. But on the final target, the hydraulic elevation system failed, locking the howitzer at its current position. System failure, sir, Washington reported, already reaching for tools. Hydraulic pressure dropping rapidly. Can you fix it? Harrington asked quietly. Not in time for this demonstration. In the hangar afterwards, Summers didn't mince words. That was a disaster. The tank board is preparing its final recommendation now, and I can tell you it won't be favorable. Sir, with respect, we experienced 2 minor technical issues that can be easily addressed. Harrington argued, the basic concept remains sound. Sound? Summers scoffed. You couldn't climb a wet hill, Lieutenant, and your firing system failed after just 5 rounds. Give us 2 weeks, Miller interjected. 2 weeks to fix the weight distribution and hydraulic systems. You don't have 2 weeks, Summers replied coldly. Based on today's performance, the board is recommending immediate termination of the program. Harrington felt a desperate idea forming. Colonel, request permission to make a personal appeal to the board. On what grounds? New information, technical innovations not yet implemented, and intelligence from the front they may not have considered. 30 minutes later, Harrington stood before the tank board, 5 pairs of skeptical eyes fixed upon him. Lieutenant Harrington, began the senior officer, a silver-haired brigadier general, I understand you have new information regarding the M8 project. Yes, sir. Harrington placed Miller's son's letter on the table. This is from the front lines in North Africa. One of many reports indicating our current anti-tank capabilities are insufficient against new German armor. We're well aware of the situation in theater, Lieutenant. How does a failed light howitzer carrier address this problem? The M8 is not a failed concept, sir. It's an unrefined one. Harrington spoke with a conviction that surprised even himself. With the new heat ammunition being developed, this vehicle could provide mobile anti-tank capabilities our forces currently lack. The demonstration today suggested otherwise, another officer commented dryly. With respect, sir, what you saw today was a crew that had less than 48 hours together operating a prototype with known issues. Give us 30 days to address those issues, and we'll show you a vehicle that can change the course of the war. A murmur of disbelief ran through the room at such a bold claim. That's quite a statement, Lieutenant, the general said. What specifically do you propose to change about the vehicle? 3 key modifications, sir. First, redesign the recoil and elevation systems using hydraulic technology adapted from commercial applications. Second, redistribute the internal weight to improve mobility in difficult terrain. Third, develop tactical doctrines specifically for this type of vehicle, emphasizing mobility and surprise rather than direct engagement. The room fell silent as the officers exchanged glances. Finally, the general spoke again. Lieutenant, your passion is commendable, but passion doesn't win wars, results do. Harrington felt the opportunity slipping away. In desperation, he played his final card. General, before you make your decision, there's one thing you should know. The men in my crew, the ones you saw today, they believe in this vehicle. Private O'Connor can put a round on target at 1,000 yards with consistency that rivals our best tank gunners. Private Washington identified and proposed solutions for the hydraulic system in hours, not weeks. And Sergeant Thompson has forgotten more about armored vehicles than most of us will ever know. He paused, gauging the impact of his words. These men represent the best of what America brings to this war: ingenuity, determination, and skill. All they're asking for is 30 days to prove what they already know, that the M8 can be a game changer. The silence that followed seemed endless. Finally, the general leaned forward. 20 days, he said flatly. Not 30. You have 20 days to address the issues demonstrated today. If the vehicle fails to meet basic performance requirements, the program will be terminated. As darkness fell that night, Harrington sat alone on the steps outside the hangar, staring at the distant silhouette of the M8 under floodlights. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention. It was Washington, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Thought you might need this, sir, the private said. Thanks, Washington. Harrington accepted gratefully. Couldn't sleep? Been thinking about the hydraulic system, sir. I believe I have a solution, but it would require parts we don't have on base. What kind of parts? Commercial-grade hydraulic cylinders. The type used in industrial equipment, not military. Stronger, more reliable under sustained pressure. Washington hesitated, then sat down beside Harrington. May I speak freely, sir? Always. This project, it means something different to each of us. For Mr. Miller, it's about his son. For Sergeant Thompson, it's about proving the brass wrong. But why does it matter to you? Harrington stared into his coffee, considering the question. My father was in the last war, he finally said. Infantry. Told me stories about watching tanks roll past his position, how they changed the entire dynamic of the battlefield. But he also told me about their limitations, how they'd break down or get stuck in mud or just plain miss their targets. He took a sip before continuing. When I enlisted, I thought I'd help build better tanks. This M8, it's not what I imagined working on. It's not glamorous. But I'm starting to think it might be exactly what our men need. Washington nodded slowly. My brother joined up right after Pearl Harbor. He's with a segregated engineering unit somewhere in the Pacific. Writes that they're building bridges under enemy fire with outdated equipment, while white units get the new stuff. This war is testing all of us, Harrington said. Testing what we believe about ourselves and each other. Maybe this project is part of that test. The next morning brought unexpected news. Colonel Summers arrived with orders that would fundamentally alter the dynamics of the M8 project. Effective immediately, your team is being expanded, he announced. The tank board has assigned Technical Sergeant Maxwell Pierce to serve as project liaison and observer. Beside Summers stood a man in his mid-30s with close-cropped brown hair and a permanently stern expression. The implication was clear. Pierce was a spawn assigned to document their failures and provide justification for the project's eventual cancellation. Pierce comes to us from the Armored Force Development Center, Summers continued. He'll be evaluating progress and reporting directly to the board. After Summers departed, Pierce made a slow circuit of the hangar, examining the M8 from every angle, occasionally making notes in a small book. His presence created immediate tension. Don't mind him, Doc Thompson muttered to Harrington. The brass always sends someone to cover their asses when a project is circling the drain. He's not just an observer, Harrington replied quietly. He's here to make sure we fail. Despite Pierce's watchful presence, the team settled into work with renewed determination. Washington focused on completely redesigning the recoil and elevation systems. It's like they tried to put a truck engine in a motorcycle frame, Washington observed, holding up a bent connecting rod. Can you fix it? Harrington asked. Not with these parts, but if we could get commercial-grade hydraulic components, like those used in industrial presses, Pierce interjected. Military equipment uses standardized parts for a reason, Private. Logistics, interchangeability, reliability, and combat conditions. With respect, Sergeant, Washington replied carefully, standard doesn't always mean optimal. These cylinders fail because they're underrated for the application. And how would field maintenance units service non-standard components? Pierce challenged. The same way they service anything, Marlon, Doc Thompson cut in, by figuring it out. Our boys are pretty smart when their lives depend on it. By mid-afternoon, the team had developed initial redesign concepts for each of the M8's major problem areas. Harrington called them together to prioritize based on their 20-day timeline. Washington, your hydraulic system is the most critical. Without a reliable firing mechanism, nothing else matters. I'll personally handle the requisition for the parts you need. Those requisitions will require tank board approval, Pierce noted. Given the non-standard nature of the components, that could take weeks. Then we'll find another way, Harrington said firmly. That evening, after most of the team had retired to their quarters, Harrington approached Pierce. Sergeant, I understand your position here. You have a job to do. But I want to be clear about something. This team believes in what we're doing. We're not just going through the motions. Belief doesn't transform an inadequate design into an effective weapon, Lieutenant. No, but it motivates men to find solutions where others see only problems. Pierce studied Harrington for a long moment. For what it's worth, I've seen dozens of projects like this one. Most fail not because the concept is flawed, but because the people involved can't adapt when reality contradicts their preconceptions. And you think we can't adapt? I think you haven't been tested yet, not really. There was something in Pierce's eyes that suggested he wasn't merely being antagonistic. The real test isn't whether you can fix the known problems. It's how you respond when new ones emerge. The first true crisis arose on the fourth day. Washington's requisition for commercial hydraulic components had been officially denied, with a note stating, non-standard components not approved for prototype development. This is Pierce's doing, Doc Thompson growled. Maybe, Harrington acknowledged. Or maybe it's just the system doing what systems do, resisting change. Miller cleared his throat. I might know someone who can help. I worked with a hydraulics manufacturer in Baltimore before the war. They're producing components for Navy vessels now, but they might have what we need. Military requisitions go through official channels, Pierce pointed out. Yes, they do, Harrington agreed. But this project has already strayed far from official channels, Sergeant. Make the call, Miller. I'd rather ask forgiveness than permission if it means giving our men in combat a fighting chance. The gamble paid off. 2 days later, a civilian truck arrived carrying a crate of industrial-grade hydraulic cylinders and valves, officially designated as evaluation samples for an unrelated Navy project. Washington immediately set to work implementing his redesign. While Washington worked on the firing mechanism, O'Connor and Miller completed their simplified targeting system. Reeves and Thompson developed an ingenious solution to the weight distribution problem by reconfiguring ammunition storage and adding strategic ballast points. It's still nose-heavy, Thompson admitted, but now it's manageable nose-heavy. By the end of the first week, the M8 had been substantially rebuilt from the inside out. What remained was the most crucial test. How would these modifications perform in practice? We need a trial run, Harrington announced. Not a formal demonstration, just a functional test to identify any issues. The test course is booked solid for the next 2 weeks, Pierce informed him. Then we don't use the test course, Harrington decided. There's an abandoned quarry 5 miles east of here. Rough terrain, varying elevations, plenty of space. That's off limits, Pierce protested. Unauthorized testing could void the entire project if anything goes wrong. For a moment, it seemed Pierce would formally object. Instead, he surprised everyone by saying, the quarry has a southern access road that's rarely patrolled. Best time would be early morning. Before dawn the next morning, the M8 rumbled quietly toward the abandoned quarry. The site proved an ideal testing ground. Steep grades, loose gravel, mud pits, and open space for mobility and firing exercises. Reeves, take us up that incline, Harrington directed, pointing to a steep, gravelly slope similar to the one that had defeated them during the official demonstration. The M8's engines growled as Reeves guided it toward the slope. Unlike before, the vehicle climbed steadily, maintaining a stable posture throughout the ascent. That's more like it, Reeves exclaimed as they reached the summit. The next test focused on the new hydraulic and targeting systems. O'Connor reported, smooth as silk, no binding, no hesitation. I can make micro-adjustments now that were impossible before. They positioned the M8 overlooking the far wall of the quarry, setting up improvised targets at various ranges. Washington loaded a standard high-explosive shell, stepping clear of the breach. Gun ready. O'Connor took a breath, then squeezed the firing mechanism. The howitzer roared, the M8 rocking with the recoil. Through his binoculars, Harrington watched as the round impacted precisely on target, shattering a large boulder in a spectacular explosion. 5 more rounds were fired in rapid succession, each finding its mark with unerring accuracy. The final test was the most critical: rapid repositioning after firing. In combat, the ability to shoot and scoot would be essential for survival. Reeves, after the next shot, immediate relocation to position Bravo, Harrington ordered. The howitzer fired, and the instant the shell was away, Reeves threw the M8 into motion. The vehicle leapt forward with surprising agility, changing position in under 30 seconds. O'Connor immediately reacquired a new target and fired again without hesitation. Time from position change to firing, 28 seconds, Doc Thompson announced, clicking his stopwatch. That's twice as fast as our previous best. By noon, they had fired 20 rounds without a single mechanical failure and demonstrated remarkable speed in target acquisition and repositioning. As they prepared to return to base, Pierce approached Harrington, his expression thoughtful. Impressive performance, Lieutenant. The modifications have clearly addressed the major deficiencies. Thank you, Sergeant. I hope your report will reflect that. It will reflect exactly what I observed, Pierce replied, though without his earlier antagonism. Unknown to the team, their unauthorized test had not gone unnoticed. As they approached the main facility, they were met by Colonel Summers and 2 military police vehicles. Lieutenant Harrington, Summers called, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Would you care to explain why the M8 prototype was removed from base without authorization? Before Harrington could respond, Pierce stepped forward. The vehicle was under my supervision, Colonel. As tank board liaison, I authorized a field test to evaluate recent modifications. Summers' eyes narrowed. You have no such authority, Sergeant. With respect, sir, my orders give me latitude to observe and evaluate all aspects of the project. I determined that a field test in terrain similar to combat conditions was necessary for a proper assessment. It was a bold lie, and Harrington was stunned by Pierce's willingness to put himself at risk. Summers studied both men for a long moment, clearly suspicious. In the future, all tests will be conducted on approved ranges with proper notification, Summers finally said. Is that understood? Perfectly, sir, Pierce replied. As Summers departed, Harrington turned to Pierce. Why did you do that? You could have let me take the heat. Pierce's expression remained neutral. The project is more important than any individual, Lieutenant, even you. 3 days later, Miller received another letter from his son. The news was grim. New German Tiger tanks had been deployed to North Africa, their 88mm guns outranging and outpunching anything in the American arsenal. Our current ammunition won't penetrate their frontal armor, Miller explained, showing Harrington technical details. Not even at point-blank range. What about the new heat rounds, Harrington asked. Still in development. The first prototypes are promising, but production is months away at best. This revelation threatened to undermine the entire MATE project. If the vehicle couldn't effectively engage the enemy's heaviest armor, its utility would be severely limited. We need those rounds, Harrington decided. Without demonstrating anti-tank capability, the board will never approve full production. Washington spoke up. Sir, I have a friend in the Ordnance Corps, Private First Class Marcus Johnson. We trained together before being assigned to different units. He's working on the Range 17 test facility where they're testing the heat rounds. Can he get us information? Harrington asked. Better than that, if I can explain the importance. He might be able to arrange something unofficial. The following day, Washington returned with valuable intelligence. His friend had confirmed the heat round testing and provided critical technical details about their performance. The rounds are designated M66, Washington reported. Early tests show penetration of up to 90 millimeters of homogeneous armor at optimal angles. More than enough to defeat a Tiger's side armor, possibly even frontal plates at close range. Johnson also mentioned they're conducting night firing tests tomorrow. Minimal personnel, minimal security. He's on duty at the ammunition bunker. Pierce, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. Lieutenant, I need to be clear about something. While I've supported this project's legitimate development efforts, I cannot participate in the misappropriation of classified ordnance. Understood, Sergeant, Harrington replied carefully. No one is suggesting anything improper. The next evening, under cover of darkness, Harrington and Washington acquired 2 M66 heat rounds from Johnson. These are from the latest production batch, Johnson whispered. Just make sure they work. This never happened. With just 10 days remaining before their final evaluation, The team focused on integrating the heat capability with their modified M8. O'Connor spent hours studying the ballistic characteristics of the new ammunition. Lower muzzle velocity means more pronounced arcing trajectory, he explained. We'll need to adjust our range tables accordingly. Can you compensate? Harrington asked. Absolutely. Actually, these rounds are perfect for the M8. Our howitzer isn't a high-velocity gun to begin with, so the lower pressure means less strain on the recoil system. The next challenge was finding a way to test the heat rounds without drawing unwanted attention. Pierce, who had maintained careful distance from the heat round acquisition, approached Harrington with a proposal. There's a demolition range on the far eastern edge of the base, he explained, used for testing explosive charges against concrete bunkers. It's scheduled for maintenance for the next 3 days. No testing authorized. And you know this how? I did my research, Lieutenant. That's my job. Pierce hesitated, then added, I can arrange for the maintenance crew to be delayed by 24 hours. That would give you a window. Early the next morning, the M8 and a small maintenance truck made their way to the demolition range. As Pierce had indicated, the facility was deserted, with various armor plates set up at distances ranging from 500 to 1,500 yards. Perfect, Miller declared, examining a particularly thick plate through binoculars. That one's at least 90 millimeters thick, similar to a Tiger's frontal armor. They positioned the M8 at 800 yards, a challenging but realistic combat range. Washington loaded the first heat round with ceremonial care. Heat round loaded and ready. On your command, Lieutenant, O'Connor said, his eye fixed to the sight. Fire! The howitzer's report echoed across the empty range. Through binoculars, Harrington watched as the round struck the armor plate dead center. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a small jet of flame erupted from the back of the plate, followed by a shower of molten metal. Direct penetration, Miller shouted excitedly. Clean through 90 millimeters at 800 yards. The second test, conducted at 200 yards, was equally successful. The M8's modified targeting system allowed O'Connor to place the round precisely where aimed, and the heat warhead performed exactly as promised. Gentlemen, Harrington announced, we just changed the game. This isn't just a support vehicle anymore. It's a tank killer. 3 days before the evaluation, Colonel Summers called Harrington to his office. Lieutenant, I've just received word from the North African Theater. There's been a major engagement involving elements of the 1st Armored Division against German Tiger tanks. Summers pushed a telegram across his desk. Heavy casualties. Dozens of Sherman tanks destroyed. Harrington scanned the document, his heart sinking. Miller's son? His unit was in the middle of it. No specific casualty information yet. Summers leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking older. The reports confirm what you've been saying all along. Our current anti-tank capabilities are inadequate. Sir, the M8 with heat rounds could help address this gap. Perhaps. Summers studied Harrington carefully. The tank board has moved up your final evaluation. They'll be here tomorrow, not 3 days from now. Apparently, word of your progress has reached higher echelons. Tomorrow, Harrington felt a surge of panic. You don't have that luxury anymore, Lieutenant. Not with men dying while we debate technical specifications. Furthermore, General Patton himself has sent an observer to witness the evaluation. Harrington returned to the hangar with the news, gathering the team for an emergency briefing. Gentlemen, tomorrow is our moment of truth. Everything we've worked for these past weeks comes down to one demonstration. The night passed in a blur of focused activity. The hangar lights burned until dawn as the team made final adjustments, ran systems checks, and prepared for every possible test scenario. Even Pierce rolled up his sleeves and assisted, his official observer role temporarily set aside. At precisely 0800, the M8 rolled out of its hangar to face its moment of judgment. The test course had been specially configured to simulate likely combat conditions. The tank board members stood beneath a canvas shelter, their expressions impassive. Beside them was a tall, lean brigadier general whom Harrington recognized as Patton's chief of staff. The evaluation began with the mobility trials. Reeves guided the M8 through the course with a skill that made difficult maneuvers look effortless. The water obstacles that had previously been problematic were traversed without hesitation. When they reached the firing portion, O'Connor demonstrated the improved targeting and hydraulic systems by placing 5 consecutive rounds into targets at ranges from 600 to 1,800 yards. The final test was the most critical, anti-tank capability. 3 armored plates had been set up, simulating the protection levels of various German tanks. The first 2 targets fell easily to standard rounds. The third, however, was the true test. 90 millimeters of hardened steel, equivalent to a Tiger tank's frontal armor. Loading heat round, Washington announced, sliding the special ammunition into the breech. Target acquired, O'Connor reported. Range 1,000 yards. Fire when ready, Harrington ordered. The howitzer roared. Through his binoculars, Harrington watched as the round struck exactly center mass on the armor plate. For a breathless moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a jet of flame erupted from the back of the plate, leaving a clean hole through material that should have been impenetrable. A murmur ran through the observing officers. The second heat round performed identically, punching through the hardened steel as if it were paper. As the M8 returned to the staging area, Harrington could see Colonel Summers and the tank board members engaged in animated discussion. Patton's representative was speaking into a field telephone, presumably reporting directly to the general himself. After what seemed an eternity, Colonel Summers approached the M8, accompanied by the senior tank board officer and Patton's representative. Lieutenant Harrington, Summers began, the board has completed its initial assessment. Harrington braced himself for the verdict, acutely aware of his crew's tension behind him. The modified M8 has exceeded all performance requirements. Summers continued, a faint smile finally breaking through. The board is recommending immediate approval for full production, with your modifications incorporated into the design. Relief flooded through Harrington, nearly buckling his knees. Furthermore, added Patton's representative, stepping forward, General Patton has personally requested that the first production units be expedited for deployment to North Africa as soon as possible. He believes this vehicle could help address our current tactical disadvantage. Thank you, sir, Harrington managed. My team deserves all the credit. Your modesty is noted, Lieutenant, but leadership matters, the general replied. You'll all receive commendations for your work here. This vehicle may save thousands of American lives before this war is over. The celebration was interrupted by Miller's arrival, running from the communications building with a telegram in hand. His face was flushed, eyes bright with emotion. My son, he gasped, holding up the message. He's alive. His tank was hit, but he escaped. He's in a field hospital, expected to recover fully. As the excitement gradually subsided, Harrington found himself standing alone beside the M8, his hand resting on its hull. The machine that had initially seemed like an awkward, flawed compromise had been transformed through their efforts into something formidable. Aberdeen Tank Museum, Maryland, 1997. And that's how it happened, the elderly Harrington concluded, his hand still resting on the preserved M8. Within 2 months, the first production units were in North Africa. By the end of the war, nearly 1,800 had been built. Jimmy stared at the modest vehicle with new appreciation. Did you ever get to see them in action, Grandpa? I did. After the M8 went into production, they sent me to Europe as a technical liaison. Saw them at Normandy, in the hedgerows, all the way into Germany. The old man's eyes took on a faraway look. They weren't the biggest or the most powerful vehicles in our arsenal, but they were in the right place at the right time. Fast, nimble, with enough punch to take out much larger opponents when properly employed. Like David against Goliath, Jimmy suggested. Harrington smiled at the analogy. Something like that. The Germans never knew what hit them. Their tanks were looking for Shermans, not paying attention to the little hell kittens sneaking around their flanks. He patted the hull one more time, a gesture of farewell to an old friend. The lesson I learned from this little machine has stayed with me all my life, Jimmy. It's not always about being the biggest or the strongest. Sometimes it's about being smart, adaptable, and refusing to quit when everyone else has given up. As they turned to leave, Jimmy looked back at the M8. Thanks for telling me, Grandpa. I never knew. Most people don't, son. History remembers the big dramatic moments, but sometimes it's the smaller stories that make all the difference. Together, they walked out of the museum into the bright Maryland sunshine. The elderly veteran and the boy, connected by blood and now by something more. The understanding that courage, innovation, and determination could transform even the most unlikely vessel into something extraordinary. Aberdeen Proving Ground, October 1942. The smell of machine oil and exhaust fumes filled the cavernous assembly hangar as the first production model M8 Hell Kitten rolled off the makeshift line. Harrington stood with his team, watching as workers applied the final touches to the olive drab paint. Just 2 weeks had passed since the successful demonstration, but the War Department had moved with unprecedented speed. Men were dying in North Africa, and the M8 offered hope. She looks different somehow, Doc Thompson observed, circling the vehicle with a critical eye. Sturdier, Harrington nodded. The production model incorporated all their modifications, the redesigned hydraulic system, the improved weight distribution, the simplified targeting mechanism. It wasn't the prototype they had labored over day and night, but its legitimate offspring, born of their desperate innovation. 12 more rolling out this week, Colonel Summers announced as he approached. His tone had changed markedly since the project's approval, pride replacing skepticism. And production is ramping up at the Cadillac plants. By January, we'll have hundreds in the pipeline. How soon until they reach the front? Miller asked. The question weighted with personal concern for his recovering son. First shipment leaves for North Africa next week, Summers replied, fast-tracked on Patton's direct orders. Which brings me to why I'm here. He turned to Harrington. Orders for you, Lieutenant? Or should I say Captain Harrington? Harrington accepted the envelope with surprise. Inside was his promotion to captain, effective immediately, along with new orders. He was being sent to North Africa as technical liaison, responsible for training crews on the newly arrived M8s and reporting field performance back to Aberdeen. Congratulations, Captain, Summers said, offering his hand. You've earned this, all of you have. As the colonel departed, Harrington's team gathered around to offer congratulations, their expressions a mixture of pride for him and uncertainty about their own futures. What happens to us now, sir? Washington asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. I've been thinking about that, Harrington replied. Miller, Doc, I want you overseeing production quality control here. These vehicles need to be perfect when they leave the factory. Lives depend on it. Both men nodded, understanding the critical importance of the assignment. Reeves, O'Connor, Washington, Harrington continued. How would you feel about joining me in North Africa? I'll need a demonstration crew who knows this machine inside and out. The three younger men exchanged glances of surprise and excitement. Reeves broke into a wide grin. You mean we get to show the boys in the field how it's done? Count me in, Captain. It won't be a joyride, Harrington cautioned. This is a combat zone. We'll be working close to the front lines, possibly under fire. All due respect, sir, Washington said quietly. But that's where we need to be, where this vehicle needs to be. The unstated reality hung in the air between them. For Washington especially, a black soldier in the segregated army of 1942, such a combat-adjacent role represented a rare opportunity to contribute directly to the war effort, beyond the service and support roles typically assigned to African-American troops. Then it's settled, Harrington decided. We ship out in 3 days. Get your affairs in order. That evening, as Harrington packed his sparse belongings in his quarters, a knock came at the door. Pierce stood in the hallway looking uncharacteristically informal in his undress uniform. Heard about your promotion and assignment, the sergeant said. Wanted to offer my congratulations in person. Thank you, Pierce. Couldn't have happened without your support. Harrington gestured for him to enter. Care for a drink? I managed to save a bit of Miller's bourbon. As Harrington poured 2 glasses, Pierce surveyed the small room. North Africa, he mused. The real test begins now, you know. How do you mean? Creating a weapon is one thing. Making it work in the chaos of combat is another entirely. Pierce accepted the offered glass. The M8 still has to prove itself where it matters most. That's why I'm going, Harrington replied, to make sure it gets every chance to succeed. Pierce nodded thoughtfully. I've been reassigned as well, back to the tank board, evaluating new projects. They're lucky to have you. Your insights made a difference on this project, whatever your initial instructions might have been. The sergeant smiled faintly. Perhaps, he raised his glass. To the hell kitten. May she live up to her name. They drank in companionable silence. 2 men who had started as adversaries, but found common ground and shared purpose. The war had a way of forcing such unlikely alliances. Watch yourself over there, Harrington, Pierce said as he prepared to leave. The desert is unforgiving, and so is the enemy. I will. Harrington hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering him since Pierce's unexpected assistance with their unauthorized tests. Why did you help us? Really, you could have reported us a dozen times. Pierce paused at the door. Because sometimes the system needs to be nudged from within. Because I saw something in that little machine worth fighting for. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. And because I've seen enough failed projects to recognize when one might actually succeed. With that, he was gone, leaving Harrington to contemplate the strange paths that had led him from engineering, student to tank officer to champion of an unlikely weapon of war. In 3 days, he would be halfway around the world, facing challenges he could scarcely imagine. For now, though, there was satisfaction in knowing that the M8 would soon be in the fight, giving American soldiers a fighting chance against superior German armor. 3 weeks later, Harrington stood on the sun-baked tarmac of an airfield outside Algiers, shielding his eyes against the blinding North African light. The heat was oppressive, a physical presence that seemed to press down from above and radiate up from the baked earth below. Beside him, Reeves, O'Connor, and Washington looked equally uncomfortable in their wool uniforms, designed for European conditions rather than the Saharan climate. "Welcome to Africa, Captain Harrington," called a dust-covered major as he approached from a nearby jeep. "Major Frank Lewis, 1st Armored Division. I'm to escort you to HQ." The drive to the divisional headquarters took them through terrain unlike anything they had seen before. Vast expanses of barren rock and sand, punctuated occasionally by small clusters of whitewashed buildings or patches of scrubby vegetation. The roads, where they existed at all, were rough and poorly maintained, sending the jeep bouncing violently over potholes and ruts. "How's the situation?" Harrington asked over the roar of the engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. Lewis's expression darkened. "Challenging. Rommel's been pushed back, but his armor still outclasses ours. Those Tigers are monsters, Captain, like nothing we've faced before." "That's why we're here," Harrington replied. "The M8s arrived last week?" 10 of them, yes. Been sitting in the depot waiting for your team. General Patton's orders, no deployment until your arrival and sign off." Lewis glanced over with curiosity. "Word is you're the father of this project." "One of many," Harrington corrected. "How are the crews taking to them?" "Mixed reaction. Some skepticism, some curiosity. They look unconventional." "They are unconventional, Major. That's their strength." At divisional headquarters, a collection of tents and hastily constructed wooden structures, they were briefed by the division's operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Hayes. Maps covered the walls, showing the current front lines and known German positions. "We're planning a push here," Hayes explained, pointing to a section of the map where the lines bulged eastward. "Intelligence suggests a panzer regiment with Tiger support. Your M8s would be assigned to support our tank destroyers, providing mobile fire support." Harrington studied the terrain indicated. "When's the operation scheduled?" 10 days from now. Enough time for you to train the assigned crews?" "It'll have to be," Harrington replied. "But first, I'd like to inspect the vehicles. Make sure they survive shipping intact." The M8s had been housed in a makeshift motor pool on the edge of the camp, canvas tarps protecting them from the worst of the desert sun and sand. As the tarps were pulled away, Harrington felt a surge of pride seeing the vehicles he had helped develop now positioned for actual combat use. They looked small and almost toy-like next to the massive Sherman tanks parked nearby, but he knew their potential. Washington immediately began a thorough inspection of the hydraulic systems, while Reeves checked the engines and drivetrains. O'Connor focused on the targeting mechanisms and gun mounts, ensuring everything was properly calibrated for combat conditions. "Everything looks good, sir," Washington reported after an hour of examination. "Some minor issues from shipping and the climate, but nothing we can't address." "Good," Harrington said. "Now let's meet the crews who'll be operating these machines." The men assigned to the M8s were a mix of veterans and replacements, their expressions ranging from open curiosity to thinly veiled skepticism. Harrington recognized the look. It was the same one he had worn when first encountering the Hell Kitten at Aberdeen. "Gentlemen," he began, standing before the assembled crews, "I'm Captain Harrington. These are Sergeant Reeves, Corporal O'Connor, and Specialist Washington. We're here to introduce you to the newest weapon in the American arsenal, the howitzer motor carriage M8. A tall, weathered sergeant near the front spoke up. "Begging your pardon, Captain, but we've already heard about these vehicles. Word is they're under-armored and undergunned compared to what the Germans are fielding." Harrington nodded, accepting the challenge. "Sergeant?" "Collins, sir. Frank Collins, 3rd Tank Battalion." "Sergeant Collins, what you've heard is partially correct. The M8 is not designed to go head-to-head with Tigers or Panthers. It's a different kind of weapon entirely." Harrington gestured toward the nearest M8. "What you're looking at is a purpose-built tank hunter. Fast, maneuverable, with a low profile that makes it difficult to spot and target." "But sir," another soldier spoke up, "that's just a howitzer mounted on a light tank chassis. How's that supposed to take out German armor?" Harrington smiled. "That's where things get interesting. Corporal O'Connor, would you explain the ammunition situation?" O'Connor stepped forward. "The M8 fires standard high-explosive rounds for infantry support, but it's also capable of delivering the new M66 heat round. This ammunition can penetrate up to 90 millimeters of armor at combat ranges, regardless of velocity. A murmur ran through the group. 90 millimeters was enough to threaten even a Tiger's side armor. The key, Harrington continued, is employing these vehicles correctly. You don't charge a Tiger head-on. You use terrain, you use cover, you strike from the flank or rear, and you reposition immediately. Hit and run. Like guerrilla warfare, but with tanks, Collins mused, his skepticism giving way to thoughtful consideration. Exactly like that, Sergeant. The Germans have us outmatched in conventional armor. We need to change the rules of engagement. Over the next week, Harrington and his team worked intensively with the assigned crews, teaching them not just how to operate the M8s, but how to think differently about armored warfare. The lessons took place in both classroom settings and in the field, with practical exercises designed to simulate combat conditions. Washington taught the maintenance crews about the specialized hydraulic systems, while Reeves focused on driving techniques that maximize the M8's mobility advantages. O'Connor worked closely with the gunners, emphasizing the importance of first-shot accuracy with the limited ammunition supply. Harrington, meanwhile, developed tactical doctrines specific to the M80's capabilities. He organized the 10 vehicles into 5 two-unit sections, each designed to operate semi-independently within a coordinated framework. You never operate alone, he stressed during a tactical briefing. 2 M8s working together can take down targets that would be suicide for either one alone. One vehicle suppresses or distracts, while the other maneuvers for the kill shot. The men absorbed the lessons quickly, their initial skepticism fading as they began to appreciate the unique capabilities of their new vehicles. By the end of the week, they were executing complex maneuvers with growing confidence, using the natural terrain features of the North African landscape to mask their movements and set up ambush positions. On the 8th day of training, as they prepared for a final field exercise before the upcoming operation, a dust-covered Jeep arrived from divisional headquarters. The driver, a harried-looking lieutenant, sought out Harrington with urgency. "Captain Harrington, sir, Colonel Hayes needs you at HQ immediately. The operation's been moved up. Germans are on the move." Harrington felt a surge of concern. "Moved up to when?" "Tomorrow, sir. Dawn assault." The news sent a ripple of tension through the M8 crews. They had made remarkable progress, but were they truly ready for combat? Harrington himself felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. These weren't just machines going into battle. They were men whose lives would depend on the weapons he had helped create and the tactics he had taught them. At headquarters, the atmosphere was one of controlled chaos as staff officers updated maps and issued orders. Colonel Hayes looked up from a table covered in tactical diagrams as Harrington entered. "Captain, situation's changed. German armor advancing in force along the Kasserine approach. Intelligence indicates at least a company of Tigers leading the assault." "The M8 crews need more time, Colonel," Harrington argued. "They're making excellent progress, but they're not fully combat ready." Hayes's expression was grim. "Time is a luxury we don't have, Captain. I've got 2 battalions of infantry about to be overrun if we don't blunt this advance. Your M8s are the only weapons we have that might be able to take out those Tigers." Harrington studied the map, mind racing through tactical options. What support will they have? Sherman Tank Company for medium armor, plus artillery support when available. Hayes pointed to several positions on the map. "We need your vehicles deployed here, here, and here. Key choke points where the terrain will channel German armor." The positions were well chosen, Harrington had to admit. Narrow valleys and ridge lines where the M80's mobility and ability to fire from hull-down positions would be advantageous. Still, sending partially trained crews against veterans of the Africa Corps gave him pause. "I'll need to accompany them, sir, as technical advisor." Hayes frowned. "That's not standard protocol for a liaison officer, Captain." "Nothing about these vehicles is standard, Colonel. The crews need someone who truly understands their capabilities and limitations." After a moment's consideration, Hayes nodded. "Very well. Report to Major Lewis for final coordination. You roll out at 0400. Harrington spent the remaining daylight hours with his crews, conducting abbreviated final training and answering last-minute questions. The men were nervous but determined, many of them veterans who had already faced German armor in earlier engagements and understood the stakes. As darkness fell over the camp, Harrington found a quiet moment to write 2 letters, one to his parents back in Michigan, explaining his pride in what they had accomplished, and one to Colonel Summers at Aberdeen, detailing the M8's performance in training and his recommendations for future production models. He sealed both, knowing they might be his final communications if tomorrow went poorly. Reeves found him sitting alone by a small campfire after most of the camp had fallen silent. "Can't sleep either, sir?" the young driver asked, settling beside him. "Too much on my mind," Harrington admitted. "These men, these machines, we're asking a lot of both." Reeves poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "You know what my daddy used to say? Pressure makes diamonds. These crews are solid, Captain, and so are our hell kittens." Harrington appreciated the young man's confidence, even if he couldn't fully share it. "How are Washington and O'Connor holding up?" "O'Connor's cleaning his service pistol for about the 5th time. Washington's making final adjustments to the hydraulics on all 10 vehicles. Said he wouldn't sleep until everyone was perfect." That sounded like his team, Harrington thought with pride. Committed to the end, regardless of the odds. "Get some rest if you can, Reeves. Tomorrow will be here before we know it." Dawn broke hazy and cool over the North African landscape, the sun struggling to penetrate a thin layer of dust and smoke that hung in the air. The convoy of vehicles moved silently along rough desert tracks, headlights extinguished to avoid detection. 10 M8 Hell Kittens, accompanied by a platoon of Sherman tanks and several support vehicles, advanced toward their assigned positions ahead of the main force. Harrington rode in the lead M8, commanded by Sergeant Collins. From his position in the turret, he could see the terrain beginning to rise ahead, forming the ridgeline that would serve as their primary defensive position. In the distance, the muffled crump of artillery fire provided an ominous backdrop, growing steadily louder as they approached the front. "All vehicles maintain radio discipline," Harrington reminded the column over the command frequency. "Positions as briefed. Hold fire until the enemy is within optimal range." The M8s separated into their assigned sections, taking up hull-down positions along the ridge where only their turrets would be visible to approaching enemy forces. The waiting began, stretching minutes into what felt like hours as the sun climbed higher and the sound of battle grew closer. "Contact," came the terse report from the forward observation post. "German armor approaching from the northeast. Multiple vehicles, including heavy Tigers." "All M8 sections, stand by," Harrington ordered, raising his binoculars to scan the valley below. Through the dust and haze, he could make out the distinctive silhouettes of German tanks advancing in a wedge formation, Tigers at the point with Panzer IVs on the flanks. "Count at least 3 Tigers, sir," Collins reported from beside him. "Plus 8, maybe 10 Panzer IVs, supporting infantry and half-tracks trailing." "That's a heavy company," Harrington assessed, feeling a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. This was no probing attack or reconnaissance in force. This was a serious armored thrust designed to punch through American lines. "Range to lead elements?" he asked the gunner. 2,000 yards in closing, sir. Still well outside effective range for heat rounds." "All sections maintain position," Harrington broadcast. "Remember your training. Target the flanks, fire and reposition, maintain section integrity." The German formation continued its advance, seemingly unaware of the small American vehicles concealed among the rocky outcroppings of the ridge. At 1,500 yards, Harrington gave the order for the Shermans to engage, hoping to draw attention away from the M8 positions. The effect was immediate. German turrets swiveled toward the new threat, 88mm guns roaring in response to the Shermans' fire. The American medium tanks were outranged and outgunned, forced to withdraw under the withering German response. "They're splitting their formation," Collins observed. "Tigers continuing advance. Panzers moving to pursue the Shermans." This was the moment Harrington had planned for. Section 1 and 2 prepare to engage lead Tiger. Sections 3 and 4 target the rightmost Tiger. Section 5 stand by to engage infantry support. At 800 yards, the optimum range for the heat rounds, Harrington gave the order. All sections cleared to engage designated targets. The ridgeline erupted as 5 M8s fired simultaneously, their 75mm howitzers belching flame and smoke. Through his binoculars, Harrington watched as 3 rounds struck the lead Tiger, 2 bouncing harmlessly off its frontal armor, but the third hitting just below the turret ring, penetrating with devastating effect. The German behemoth shuddered to a halt, black smoke pouring from its hatches. "Hit! Lead Tiger disabled!" came an excited report over the radio. "Reposition immediately," Harrington ordered, knowing the German gunners would quickly identify their firing positions. "Execute Plan Baker." The M8s that had fired were already in motion, engines roaring as they pulled back from the ridgeline and moved laterally to new positions according to their rehearsed plan. German return fire cratered the positions they had just vacated, 80mm shells throwing geysers of rock and soil into the air. The battle fell into a deadly rhythm. M8s would appear briefly on the ridgeline, fire their heat rounds at the vulnerable side armor of German tanks, then disappear before effective return fire could find them. The Hellkitten's mobility proved decisive in the rough terrain, allowing them to shift position constantly while the heavier German tanks were largely confined to the valley floor. Within 20 minutes, the German advance had stalled completely. 2 Tigers and 3 Panzer IVs burned in the valley, their crews either dead or having abandoned their vehicles. The remaining German armor began a fighting withdrawal, covering the retreat of their infantry support. "They're pulling back," Collins reported, disbelief evident in his voice. "We actually stopped them." "For now," Harrington cautioned, knowing the German forces would regroup and return with a better understanding of what they faced. "All sections, report status." The reports came in quickly. 8 M8s operational, 2 damaged but repairable, 3 crewmen wounded, none critically, ammunition expended, 27 heat rounds and 43 high-explosive shells used against infantry positions. By any measure, it was a remarkable success. The hastily trained M8 crews had faced some of Germany's most formidable armor and not only survived but prevailed. The cost to the enemy had been significant. 3 Tiger tanks and 5 Panzer IVs destroyed or disabled, plus substantial infantry casualties from the high-explosive rounds. As Harrington supervised the regrouping of the M8 sections at their rally point behind the ridge, Major Lewis arrived in his command jeep, dust coating his uniform and face, but unable to mask his expression of stunned admiration. "Captain Harrington," he called as he approached, "Colonel Hayes sends his congratulations. Your Hell Kittens just saved an entire battalion." Intelligence had underestimated the German strength by half. Harrington felt a complex mixture of relief, pride, and lingering concern. "The crews deserve the credit, Major. They performed exceptionally well under pressure." "And the vehicles? How did they hold up?" "Better than expected," Harrington replied honestly. "The hydraulics handled the heat and dust, targeting systems remained accurate, and the heat rounds performed exactly as designed against Tiger armor." Lewis nodded thoughtfully. "The general will want a full briefing. This changes our tactical options significantly." He surveyed the tired but jubilant M8 crews as they performed post-battle maintenance on their vehicles. How soon can they be ready for another operation? Harrington felt a surge of protectiveness toward the men who had just risked their lives. "They need at least 48 hours for proper maintenance and rest, sir. These may be good machines, but they're operated by human beings." "Understood, Captain. But be aware the situation remains fluid. The Germans won't take this defeat lightly." Lewis's warning proved prophetic. Just after midnight, as the camp settled into an uneasy slumber, the air raid sirens wailed their banshee warning. German aircraft, Junkers Ju-87, Stuka dive bombers screamed out of the night sky, their distinctive sirens adding to the terror of their appearance. Harrington was thrown from his cot by the first explosion, the ground shaking as bombs found targets among the parked vehicles and tents. Men scrambled for cover or anti-aircraft positions, confusion reigning in the darkness, punctuated by the harsh glare of explosions and fires. "The motor pool," someone shouted. "They're targeting the vehicles." Harrington ran toward the area where the M8s had been parked, Reeves and Washington close behind him. Through smoke and dust, they could see the devastation. 2 Hell Kittens already burning fiercely, a third overturned by a near miss. Crews were attempting to move the undamaged vehicles to safety, while others fought the fires with extinguishers and sand. "Get them dispersed," Harrington ordered, grabbing the nearest crewman. 500-yard minimum separation. Move." The German pilots, having expended their bomb loads, switched to strafing runs, machine guns chattering as they sought targets of opportunity. Harrington threw himself flat as bullets kicked up dirt around him, feeling their passage as a physical pressure in the air. When the attack finally ended, the damage assessment was sobering. 4 M8s destroyed beyond repair, 2 damaged but salvageable with significant work. 3 crewmen killed, 7 wounded. The successful debut of the Hell Kitten had been met with a swift and terrible response. In the command tent the following morning, Colonel Hayes studied the updated situation maps with a grim expression. "German counterattack expected within 48 hours, he informed the assembled officers. Significant armor elements observed moving up from reserve positions. "Our M8 strength is reduced to 4 fully operational vehicles, sir," Harrington reported. "We can field the 2 damaged units in an emergency, but reliability would be questionable." Hayes nodded, absorbing the information. Captain, I'm reassigning your remaining vehicles to defensive positions here and here. He indicated two critical road junctions on the map. Intelligence suggests the German attack will focus on one of these axes of advance. With respect, Colonel, splitting our forces further reduces their effectiveness. The M8s work best in coordinated sections. Noted, Captain, but necessity dictates otherwise. We're stretched thin across the entire front. Harrington recognized the impossible choices facing the Colonel. Limited resources, extensive front lines, and an enemy who held the initiative. Understood, sir. We'll make it work. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity as Harrington and his team worked to prepare the remaining M8s for the expected German assault. Washington led the effort to salvage usable parts from the destroyed vehicles to repair the damaged ones, working through the night with local mechanics. O'Connor focused on ammunition distribution, ensuring each vehicle had the optimal mix of heat and high explosive rounds. Reeves trained replacement drivers on the fine points of M8 handling and combat conditions. Harrington himself split his time between coordination with command staff and visiting the dispersed M8 positions, checking preparations and bolstering morale. The crews, despite their recent losses, remained determined. They had drawn blood from the feared Tiger tanks and lived to tell the tale. At the northernmost position, manned by Sergeant Collins and his crew, Harrington found the men carefully camouflaging their vehicle with local vegetation and netting. The M8 was positioned in a small ravine that offered both concealment and a clear field of fire toward the most likely approach routes. "Quite the setup, Sergeant," Harrington commented, inspecting their work. "Thank you, sir. Figured if we can't match their armor, we'd better make ourselves hard to spot." Collins pointed to several carefully prepared alternate positions. Got 3 fallback points selected, each with pre-ranged firing solutions for the likely engagement areas. Harrington nodded approvingly. The sergeant had taken the tactical lessons to heart and adapted them to the specific terrain. "How's the crew holding up?" "Bit jumpy, sir, especially after the air raid, but solid where it counts." Collins lowered his voice. "Truth is, Captain, I didn't believe in these machines at first. Thought they were a stopgap at best. But after seeing what they can do against those Tigers..." He shook his head in wonderment. "Hell of a thing." "Keep that healthy skepticism, Sergeant. These aren't miracle weapons. They're tools that work when employed correctly by men who understand their capabilities and limitations." As Harrington prepared to depart, Collins hesitated, then asked the question clearly on his mind. "Sir, what happens after this? To the M8 program, I mean." It was a good question, one that Harrington himself had been pondering. "Depends on the overall results, I suppose, but based on what I've seen so far, I believe the Hell Kitten has earned its place in our arsenal." The German attack, when it came, did not follow either of the predicted routes. Instead, under cover of a heavy morning fog that blanketed the valley, Panzer units slipped through a gap in the American lines 10 miles south of the main defensive positions. By the time the breach was detected, German armor was already threatening the divisional headquarters and supply depots. "All available armor assets converge on grid reference Alpha 7, came the urgent call over the command net. "HQ under direct assault. Repeat, HQ under direct assault." Harrington, who had been inspecting the southernmost M8 position when the attack began, immediately ordered all Hell Kitten units to respond. "All M8 sections proceed at maximum speed to grid Alpha 7. Use Route Delta to avoid known enemy positions." Route Delta was a rough desert track that wound through terrain too difficult for conventional tanks, but potentially navigable by the lighter, more agile M8s. It would allow them to approach the headquarters area from an unexpected direction, potentially catching the German armor in the flank or rear. Harrington joined Washington in the nearest M8, commanded by a young lieutenant named Parker. "Your vehicle, your command," he assured the officer. "I'm just along for the ride." The journey was punishing, the M8 bouncing violently over rocks and through shallow wadis as the driver pushed the machine to its limits. Dust choked the air inside the open turret, coating throats and lungs despite the scarves the men wore over their faces. Through it all, Harrington was impressed by the vehicle's performance. The suspension modifications they had implemented at Aberdeen were proving their worth in the harshest possible testing ground. After 40 minutes of brutal travel, they crested a small rise and saw the situation at headquarters. 3 Tiger tanks and several Panzer IVs had penetrated the perimeter defenses and were systematically destroying buildings and vehicles. American infantry fought desperately from improvised positions, but their anti-tank weapons were largely ineffective against the German armor. All M8 units report positions, Harrington called over the radio. 3 of the 4 operational Hell Kittens had arrived, approaching the battle from different directions according to their starting positions. The 4th, commanded by Collins, was still 10 minutes out. Perfect, Harrington assessed. We have them surrounded. Lieutenant Parker, coordinate with the other sections. Simultaneous attack from 3 directions. Focus on the Tigers first. Parker relayed the orders, positioning his own M8 behind a low stone wall that offered both concealment and cover. At his command, all 3 Hell Kittens opened fire simultaneously, heat rounds streaking toward the German tanks from unexpected directions. The effect was devastating. Caught in the open and focused on the buildings they were destroying, the German tanks had no time to identify the new threat before the first hits registered. 2 Tigers were struck in their more vulnerable side armor, one brewing up in a spectacular explosion as its ammunition cooked off, the other immobilized with a destroyed track and damaged drive sprocket. The 3rd Tiger and the Panzer IVs immediately began to react, turrets traversing wildly as they sought targets among the surrounding terrain. Their return fire was fierce but largely ineffective against the well-concealed M8s, which were already repositioning after their initial volleys. Keep moving, Harrington urged, as Parker's driver backed their vehicle down behind the rise. Find a new firing position. The battle devolved into a deadly game of hide-and-seek, with the M8s using their mobility and the complex terrain around the headquarters area to strike and fade before the German gunners could acquire them. The heat rounds continued to prove their worth, penetrating German armor with devastating effect when they struck vulnerable areas. By the time Collins arrived with the 4th M8, the tide had turned decisively. The remaining German tanks, having lost 2 Tigers and 3 Panzer IVs, began a fighting withdrawal, covering each other as they pulled back from the headquarters area. American infantry surged forward, reclaiming ground and securing damaged German vehicles. In the aftermath, as medical teams tended the wounded and engineers assessed the damage to the headquarters facilities, Colonel Hayes found Harrington supervising repairs to one of the M8s that had taken a glancing hit from a German shell. "That's twice your Hell Kittens have saved our bacon, Captain," the colonel said by way of greeting. "General Patton will be pleased when he receives my report." Harrington wiped grime from his face with a rag that was itself filthy from the day's action. "The vehicles performed admirably, sir, but it's the crews who deserve the recognition. They've mastered complex tactics in minimal time, under combat conditions." Hayes nodded agreement. "They'll get it. I'm recommending commendations for all of them." He surveyed the battered but intact M8. "How soon before these can be operational again?" "2 need minor repairs, should be combat ready by tomorrow. The other 2 are already back in service." Harrington hesitated, then added, "But we're down to 4 vehicles total, Colonel. That's barely a platoon." "Reinforcements are on the way, Captain. Word from Algiers is that 30 more M8s arrived in the last convoy. They'll be distributed across the front within the week." Hayes smiled at Harrington's surprised expression. "Your reports to Aberdeen didn't go unnoticed. Production has been accelerated based on the vehicle's early success." The news lifted a weight from Harrington's shoulders. The project that had begun in desperate innovation at Aberdeen was proving its worth in the crucible of combat. Men would live because of the work they had done. "There's more," Hayes continued. "Orders for you and your team. After the replacement M8s arrive and crews are trained, you're being reassigned to the Italian front. They need your expertise there as they prepare for the push north." The war was expanding, Harrington realized. The Hell Kittens would soon be tested in new terrain against new challenges. The mountains and narrow valleys of Italy would present different tactical problems than the open deserts of North Africa. "We'll be ready, sir," he assured the colonel. "When do we depart?" 2 weeks, enough time to train replacement crews here and ensure a smooth transition. Hayes offered his hand. "You've done remarkable work, Captain. The M8 has changed the equation in our favor, at least in this sector." After the colonel departed, Harrington found a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. From skeptical lieutenant to combat-proven captain, from engineering student to battlefield innovator. The Hell Kitten had evolved as well, from problematic prototype to respected weapon. Both had been forged in the fire of necessity, transformed by the demands of war. Washington approached, his uniform caked with dust and grease from the repair work. "M8 number 3 is back in service, sir. Hydraulics are holding steady despite the punishment they have taken." "Good work," Harrington acknowledged. "How are you holding up?" Washington considered the question seriously before answering. Learning more in these few weeks than I could in years of schooling, sir. About engineering, about combat, about men under pressure. A faint smile crossed his face. About what's possible when people work together, regardless of where they come from. Harrington nodded understanding. The crucible of war had a way of burning away society's artificial barriers, leaving only the essential qualities of courage, competence, and character. Washington had proven himself repeatedly, earning the respect of every man in the unit through his technical brilliance and unwavering dedication. Orders came through, Harrington informed him. We're heading to Italy in 2 weeks. New challenges, new terrain. The Hell Kitten will need to adapt again. We'll make it work, sir, Washington replied with quiet confidence. That's what we do. As the African sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield where American and German machines had clashed, Harrington surveyed the 4 battered but unbowed M8s positioned around the headquarters perimeter. They looked almost comically small next to the destroyed hulk of a Tiger tank, yet they had prevailed through speed, agility, and the courage of their crews. David had indeed defeated Goliath, not through miraculous intervention, but through intelligence, adaptation, and relentless innovation. The lesson would serve them well in the campaigns to come, as the war ground on and new challenges emerged. The Hell Kitten had found its edge, proving that in warfare, as in life, it was not always the biggest or strongest that survived, but the most adaptable. That night, as the stars emerged in the clear desert sky and the camp settled into the rhythm of war, Harrington wrote another letter to Colonel Summers at Aberdeen. Unlike his earlier correspondence, this one was filled not with technical specifications or performance metrics, but with stories of the men who operated the machines he had helped create, their courage, their ingenuity, their determination in the face of overwhelming odds. These were the true measure of the project's success, far beyond anything that could be quantified in official reports. The Hell Kitten, he concluded, was more than just a weapon. It was a testament to what was possible when necessity drove innovation, when barriers between men were transcended in pursuit of a common goal, when American ingenuity was unleashed against seemingly insurmountable challenges. In that sense, it embodied the very spirit that would ultimately determine the outcome of the global conflict: adaptability, resilience, and the unwavering belief that the seemingly impossible could be achieved through perseverance and collective effort. As he sealed the letter, Harrington felt a renewed sense of purpose. The war was far from over, the challenges ahead daunting. But the lessons of the Hell Kitten would travel with him to Italy and beyond, a reminder that even the smallest, most unlikely weapon could change the course of battle when placed in the hands of brave men with the wisdom to use it properly. Outside, the M8 stood silent in the moonlight, their profiles low against the desert horizon. Tomorrow they would roll again, carrying their crews into danger once more. But tonight they had earned their rest, these strange little machines that had proven their worth in the harshest test imaginable. The Hell Kittens had found their place in the arsenal of democracy, their steel forged and tempered in the fires of North African combat. Ready now for whatever challenges lay ahead, snow blanketed the rugged Apennine Mountains, transforming the war-torn Italian landscape into a deceptively peaceful winter tableau. Captain William Harrington stood at the edge of a forward observation post, breath clouding in the frigid air as he studied the valley below through field binoculars. Beside him, Sergeant Frank Collins stamped his feet against the cold, his once desert-tanned face now windburned from the harsh Italian winter. "Different world from North Africa, ain't it, Captain?" Collins remarked, his voice low to avoid carrying in the clear mountain air. "In every way," Harrington agreed, lowering the binoculars. "Desert was hell on engines, but at least you could see the enemy coming. Here." He gestured toward the maze of steep slopes, narrow valleys, and dense pine forests that characterized the Italian front. "The Germans could be 50 yards away, and we'd never know it until they opened fire." The challenging terrain had transformed the nature of the conflict since their arrival 3 months earlier. The wide-open maneuver warfare of North Africa had given way to a grueling, yard-by-yard advance against entrenched German positions. For the M8 Hell Kitten crews, it meant adapting once again, finding new ways to leverage their unique capabilities in an environment that seemed designed to negate them. "Reconnaissance reports ready, sir," announced Washington as he approached, clutching a map case. In the months since North Africa, the talented mechanic had proven himself far more valuable than his official role suggested. His analytical mind and attention to detail had made him Harrington's unofficial intelligence officer, responsible for collating reports from forward units and translating them into actionable information. Inside the cramped command tent, Washington spread the maps across a folding table. Red pencil marks indicated known German positions, blue showed American lines. Between them, large areas remained unmarked, representing the uncertain no-man's land where patrols from both sides skirmished in the snow and fog. German armor remains concentrated here, Washington explained, pointing to a road junction behind the enemy's main line. At least 4 Panther tanks plus mechanized infantry support. They're dug in well, using the buildings for cover. Harrington studied the map intently. The small Italian village of Monte Cassino sat astride a critical supply route that the Allied advance needed to secure. Its narrow streets and stone buildings provided perfect defensive positions, while the surrounding mountainous terrain channeled any approach along predictable routes easily covered by pre-ranged artillery. Conventional assault would be costly, Harrington mused. Infantry would be exposed crossing this open ground, and our Shermans can't match Panthers in a direct engagement. Which is why the general wants your hell kittens involved, said a new voice from the tent entrance. Colonel James Hayes, now commanding the armored elements of the division, ducked into the tent, brushing snow from his shoulders. His transfer from North Africa had coincided with Harrington's, bringing a welcome familiar face to the Italian campaign. Captain, Hayes acknowledged with a nod, the situation at Monte Cassino has reached a critical point. We've tried frontal assaults, we've tried artillery bombardment. Nothing's shifted the Germans. Command believes your M8s might offer an unconventional solution. The M8s are effective tank hunters, Colonel, but they're not miracle workers, Harrington cautioned. Their armor won't stand up to Panther fire any better than it did to Tigers. I'm not suggesting a frontal assault, Hayes clarified. We're looking at a night operation. Use the Hell Kitten's mobility to infiltrate here and here. He indicated 2 narrow mountain trails flanking the village. Get behind their positions, create chaos, then withdraw before they can organize an effective response. The plan was audacious, perhaps even reckless, but Harrington saw the potential. The M8's low silhouette and relatively quiet engines could be advantageous in a night operation. Their 75mm howitzers, loaded with high explosive shells, could wreak havoc on German positions before the defenders realized what was happening. How many vehicles are you thinking? Harrington asked. 6, 3 from each approach, your best crews. Harrington mentally reviewed his available units. After 15 months of continuous combat across 2 theaters, the original M8 teams had been scattered by casualties, promotions, and reassignments. Of his original Aberdeen team, only Washington and O'Connor remained, with Reeves having been transferred to a training role in England after taking shrapnel in his right leg during a German counterattack. I'll need Collins, Martinez, Parker, O'Connor, Washington, and I'll command the 6th vehicle myself, Harrington decided. When is the operation scheduled? Tomorrow night. New moon, forecast for light cloud cover. Good conditions for limited visibility operations. Hayes studied Harrington's expression carefully. This is volunteer only, Captain. I won't order men on what amounts to a commando raid. Harrington appreciated the colonel's candor. They'll volunteer. These crews have something to prove after the setbacks at Salerno. The landing at Salerno 2 months earlier had been a brutal introduction to the Italian campaign for the M8 units. German 80mm guns positioned in the hills had picked off 3 Hell Kittens in the first hour of the assault, before they could even reach effective firing positions. The surviving crews had fought their way inland, but the psychological impact of those early losses lingered. I'll brief them immediately, Harrington said. We'll need to modify the vehicles for night operations. Muffled exhausts, blackout running lights, extra ammunition storage. Whatever you need, Hayes assured him. This operation has priority. After the colonel departed, Harrington turned to Washington. Find O'Connor and get the other section leaders here within the hour. This one's going to take careful planning. By dusk, the 6 selected M8 crews were gathered around the map table, faces serious as Harrington outlined the mission. The men represented a cross-section of the American military machine. Farm boys from Kansas, factory workers from Detroit, college students whose education had been interrupted by war. Different backgrounds, different skills, united by their experience with the unique vehicle they operated. The mission objectives are straightforward, Harrington explained. Infiltrate behind German lines, destroy or disable their armored vehicles, disrupt command and communication facilities, then withdraw along these escape routes. He traced the planned paths with his finger. Speed and surprise are our only advantages. Once they realize what's happening, we'll be facing the full weight of their response. What about infantry support? Asked Lieutenant Parker, a recent West Point graduate who had proven himself an innovative tactical thinker. Negative. Additional personnel would compromise stealth. This is strictly an armor operation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 6 lightly armored vehicles, operating independently behind enemy lines without infantry protection against German anti-tank teams. Questions, Harrington invited. Extraction plan if a vehicle is disabled? Collins asked, always the pragmatist. Crews transfer to operational vehicles. No one gets left behind. Harrington met each man's eyes in turn. I want to be clear about something. This mission is volunteer only. Anyone who wants out, now's the time. No questions asked, no marks on your record. No one moved. After a moment, O'Connor spoke for all of them. When do we start prepping the vehicles, sir? Harrington felt a surge of pride in these men, who had mastered the quirky, undergunned machine that most tankers had initially dismissed, turning it into one of the most effective specialized weapons in the American arsenal. Right now, he replied, we roll at 0200 hours. The preparations continued through the night, with Washington supervising modifications to minimize noise and improve night maneuverability. Exhaust systems were wrapped in asbestos cloth and wire to reduce both sound and visible heat signatures. Turret mechanisms received additional grease to eliminate squeaking. Radio operators adjusted their equipment for short-range, low-power transmission to avoid German direction finding. Shortly after midnight, as final checks were underway, Harrington found Washington making adjustments to the hydraulic system on Collins M8. Everything on schedule? Harrington asked. Washington nodded without looking up from his work. Yes, sir, all vehicles operational, though number 4's transmission is showing wear. Should hold for this mission, but it'll need a complete rebuild afterward. Harrington watched the skilled mechanic's hands move with practiced precision, even in the dim light of hooded flashlights. You've come a long way from Aberdeen, Washington. Washington paused, glancing up with a faint smile. We all have, sir. It was true. The journey from that first skeptical assessment of the prototype M8 to this moment had transformed all of them. Harrington had arrived at Aberdeen as an inexperienced lieutenant with more engineering knowledge than combat wisdom. Now he commanded battle-hardened men with absolute confidence, making life-and-death decisions that once would have paralyzed him. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Washington considered the question, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. About joining the project? No, sir. About some of the men we've lost along the way? Every day. He looked toward the distant front lines where occasional flares illuminated the nighttime battlefield. But that's war, I suppose. You don't get to choose all the outcomes, just how you respond to them. The wisdom in the statement struck Harrington. It applied equally to their experience with the M8 itself, a vehicle born of necessity rather than optimal design, whose success came not from overwhelming power or impenetrable armor, but from the ingenuity and adaptability of the men who operated it. Final briefing at 0130, Harrington said, clapping Washington on the shoulder. Get some rest if you can. At precisely 0200 hours, 6 M8 Hell Kittens moved out from the American lines, engines muffled to a low rumble as they followed narrow goat paths into the mountains flanking Monte Cassino. The night was cold and clear, stars providing just enough light for the drivers to navigate the treacherous terrain without using headlights. Inside the vehicles, crews spoke in whispers, if at all, tension building as they penetrated deeper into enemy territory. Harrington led the eastern group of 3 M8s, with Collins, Parker, and their crews following in precise interval. The path wound through dense pine forest, branches occasionally scraping against the hulls, with sounds that seemed deafening in the night silence. Every curve brought the risk of ambush or mines, yet they encountered neither, the Germans apparently believing the route impassable to vehicles. After an hour of careful movement, they reached their planned observation point, a small clearing that offered a commanding view of the rear areas of the German position. Through night binoculars, Harrington could make out the shapes of armored vehicles parked between buildings, crews sleeping nearby in tents and makeshift shelters. A command post was identifiable by the radio antennas extending from a stone farmhouse, with guards patrolling its perimeter. 3 Panthers, 2 Stoogie assault guns, multiple transport vehicles, Harrington whispered into his radio, broadcasting to both his group and O'Connor's team approaching from the west. German infantry, approximately platoon strength, most appears to be sleeping. No signs they've detected our approach. Western group in position, came O'Connor's hushed reply. We have visual on 2 more Panthers and their fuel depot, awaiting your signal. Harrington checked his watch. 0317 hours. They were slightly ahead of schedule, which meant the planned artillery diversion from American lines would not begin for another 13 minutes. He surveyed the target area once more, considering options. The sleeping German tankers represented tempting targets, but Harrington's orders emphasized destroying equipment over personnel. Dead men could be replaced. Tanks and guns were far harder for the resource-strapped German army to replenish at this stage of the war. All units, load high explosive, he ordered quietly. Eastern Group targets the Panthers and command post. Western Group, target the additional armor and fuel depot. Fire on my signal, 3 rounds rapid, then reposition immediately. The next minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Gunners aligned their weapons on designated targets. Loaders positioned rounds for rapid deployment. Drivers kept engines idling for immediate movement after firing. At exactly 0330, the distant crump of American artillery began, shells impacting north of the village in a deliberate miss designed to distract rather than damage. All units, fire, Harrington commanded. The night erupted in coordinated chaos as 6 75mm howitzers fired simultaneously. The muzzle flashes briefly illuminated the mountainside, revealing the M8s in stark silhouette before darkness reclaimed the scene. Through his binoculars, Harrington watched with grim satisfaction as shells found their marks. One Panther's ammunition storage detonated in a spectacular secondary explosion, the turret lifting completely off the hull. The command post took a direct hit, its roof collapsing as radio equipment sparked and burned. The surviving German forces reacted with professional speed despite their surprise. Soldiers poured from shelters, manning defensive positions, and attempting to locate the source of the attack. A Panther's engine roared to life, its turret traversing as the crew sought targets. Relocate, relocate, Harrington ordered as his gunner fired their final prepared round. The M8s were already in motion, backing into the tree line before German return fire could find them. Using rehearsed maneuvers, they moved to secondary firing positions 300 yards from their initial location. From the western approach, O'Connor reported similar success. Fuel depot hit and burning, 1 Panther destroyed, 1 damaged. Repositioning now. The second volley caught the Germans still reacting to the first. As the defenders oriented toward the initial firing positions, the M8s struck again from new angles, sowing further confusion. German return fire blasted the empty forest where the Hell Kittens had been moments before, while accurate American shells continued to find targets among the increasingly desperate enemy forces. After the third volley, Harrington gave the order to withdraw. The mission had achieved its objectives. 4 German armored vehicles destroyed, their command structure disrupted, and their rear area thrown into disarray. Now the M8s needed to exit before the Germans could organize an effective counterattack or bring their superior numbers to bear. The withdrawal proved more challenging than the approach. Alerted German units had begun moving reinforcements toward the area, including infantry with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. As Collins' M8 rounded a bend in the narrow trail, it encountered a German half-track ascending from the opposite direction. Both vehicles halted in momentary shock, separated by less than 50 yards of mountain path, with steep slopes preventing evasion on either side. The German gunner recovered first, swiveling his MG-42 machine gun toward the American vehicle. Collins's gunner fired instinctively, the 75mm round striking the half-track squarely and transforming it into a fireball that briefly illuminated the entire hillside. The explosion was certain to alert every German unit in the area. All vehicles, maximum speed, Harrington ordered, abandoning stealth for velocity. Follow your designated escape routes. Radio silence no longer necessary. The M8s accelerated as much as the treacherous mountain paths allowed, engines straining against the steep grades. Behind them, German flares began to illuminate the night sky, followed by the sharp crack of 80mm anti-tank guns firing blindly into likely avenues of retreat. Harrington's group encountered no further resistance, reaching American lines just as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. O'Connor's western team reported similar success, though one vehicle had thrown a track navigating a particularly rough section of trail and had to be abandoned after its crew removed the breech block from the howitzer to prevent German use. As the sun rose over Monte Cassino, the results of the night raid became evident. Black smoke rose from multiple sites within the German position, and reconnaissance aircraft reported significant movement of enemy forces away from their forward positions, apparently responding to the perceived threat to their rear areas. The disruption provided the opening Allied commanders had sought, allowing infantry units to advance and secure key terrain features with reduced opposition. "Remarkable work, Captain," Colonel Hayes commended Harrington during the post-operation briefing. "5 armored vehicles destroyed, command infrastructure disrupted, and most importantly, the psychological impact. The Germans are rattled. They didn't believe armor could operate in that terrain, especially at night." "The M8 isn't a conventional tank," Harrington explained. "Its limitations in armor and firepower are offset by mobility and flexibility. The crews have learned to leverage those advantages." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "I've been authorized to form a specialized company under your command, Captain. 12 M8s with dedicated support personnel, operating independently for special operations like last night's raid. Command is calling it the Ghost Battalion informally, though the official designation will be less colorful." The offer represented a significant opportunity, recognizing both Harrington's leadership and the unique capabilities of the Hell Kitten. Yet he felt an immediate hesitation, a sense that the moment represented a crossroads in his relationship with the vehicle he had helped develop. "I'm honored by the confidence, Colonel, but I believe the M8 program has reached a critical juncture." Harrington chose his words carefully. "The vehicle has proven its worth in combat, but it remains a compromised design developed under wartime pressure. With what we've learned, I believe I could contribute more by returning to Aberdeen to assist in developing the next generation of tank destroyers." Hayes seemed surprised. "You want to leave a combat command to return to development work?" "Most officers would consider that a step backward." "Progress isn't always forward, sir. Sometimes it's circular," Harrington replied. "The M8 succeeded because we applied battlefield lessons to its development. Now we have 15 months of combat experience across 2 theaters to inform the next design. That knowledge is too valuable to leave unused." After a moment's consideration, Hayes nodded. "I'll forward your request to Division. Given your unique background and experience, I suspect it will be approved." He extended his hand. "The M8 changed the equation for us, Captain. Your work here mattered." The handshake felt like the closing of a chapter, an acknowledgement that the Hell Kitten story and Harrington's role in it was evolving beyond the battlefield. Aberdeen Proving Ground, April 1944. Spring had transformed the Maryland landscape, cherry blossoms and dogwoods, adding splashes of color to the military installation where Harrington's journey with the M8 had begun nearly 2 years earlier. Now a major, his combat experience evident in both the decorations on his uniform and the weathered confidence in his bearing, Harrington stood before a new group of engineers and officers in the same hangar where he had first encountered the prototype Hell Kitten. "The M8 was born of necessity," he explained, gesturing toward the battle-scarred vehicle positioned beside him, one of the original North African units shipped back for analysis. Limited resources, urgent need, and a recognition that unconventional solutions were required to address the armored threat we faced. Its success in combat wasn't despite its limitations, but because we learned to transform those limitations into tactical advantages. The audience, a mix of Ordnance Department officials and automotive engineers from Detroit, listened attentively. These were the men responsible for developing the next generation of American armor, and Harrington had been brought back specifically to ensure that frontline lessons informed their designs. Mobility over armor, surprise over raw firepower, adaptability over specialization. These principles governed successful M8 operations from North Africa to Italy. Harrington ran his hand along the vehicle's scarred hull, feeling the dents and weld repairs that told stories of combat survived. The crews called it Hell Kitten because despite its small size and apparent fragility, it had claws and knew how to use them. After the formal presentation, as the group broke into smaller technical discussions, a familiar figure approached. Colonel Richard Summers, now significantly grayer, but still possessing the same intimidating presence, offered his hand. "Major Harrington, welcome back to Aberdeen." "Colonel Summers," Harrington acknowledged, shaking the offered hand with genuine respect. "It's good to be back, sir. Feels like coming full circle." "Indeed it does." Summers studied the battle-worn M8 thoughtfully. "When you first laid eyes on this machine, you called it a coffin with tracks, as I recall." Harrington smiled at the memory. I did. Shows how much I had to learn. Not at all. Your engineering assessment was entirely correct, was Jafranfo. It was tactically that we had to adjust our thinking. Summers gestured toward wall where photographs displayed M8s in various combat theaters. 2,100 produced before production ended, served in every major campaign. Not bad for a stopgap solution. The production numbers surprised Harrington. When he had left for North Africa, the program's future had still seemed uncertain. I had no idea it had been deployed so widely. Oh yes, the Pacific theaters especially found them valuable for infantry support in jungle conditions. The Marines particularly appreciated their mobility in terrain where conventional tanks bogged down. Summers led him toward a table where blueprints were spread out. But I didn't catch up with you to reminisce. I wanted to show you what your experience has helped create. The technical drawings depicted a vehicle with a distinctly different profile from the M8, yet Harrington could see the lineage of lessons learned. Lower silhouette, redesigned suspension for improved cross-country mobility, and most significantly, a purpose-designed gun rather than an adapted howitzer. The M18 Hellcat, Summers announced with evident pride. 76mm gun, top speed of 50 miles per hour, torsion bar suspension for enhanced stability when firing on the move. Incorporates everything we learned from the M8 program, but purpose-built as a tank destroyer rather than adapted from existing components. Harrington studied the plans with professional appreciation. The M18 represented a genuine evolution, addressing the M8's limitations while building on its proven strengths. When does it enter service? First units already deployed to Europe. Initial combat reports are promising. Summers rolled up the blueprints carefully. Your recommendations form the core of the design philosophy, Major. The emphasis on speed over armor, mobility over firepower. The M18 is the direct descendant of your Hellkitten. The acknowledgement brought unexpected emotion. Harrington had lived with the M8 through its most critical phases: troubled birth, combat validation, eventual acceptance. To see its legacy continuing, its lessons informing future designs, provided a sense of completion he hadn't realized he needed. There's something else, Summers continued. A new assignment, if you're interested. We're establishing a dedicated tank destroyer development team, bringing together combat veterans, engineers, and automotive specialists, leveraging experience from M8 and M18 operations to develop the next generation. We need someone who understands both the engineering and tactical aspects to lead the effort. The offer represented exactly what Harrington had hoped for when requesting transfer back from Italy: the opportunity to translate battlefield lessons into tangible improvements for the men still fighting. I'd be honored, Colonel. Excellent. There's a team I'd like you to meet. Summers led him toward a nearby conference room. Some familiar faces, actually. Inside, Harrington found Washington and O'Connor engaged in animated technical discussion with several engineers. Sergeant Thompson, Doc, sat nearby, offering occasional gruff corrections when the conversation strayed from practical reality. Even Pierce was present, now wearing oak leaf clusters that matched Harrington's own. The band's back together, O'Connor grinned, rising to shake Harrington's hand. They pulled us all back for this project. Said they needed the original Hellkitten team to help birth its successor. Not all of us made it back, Washington noted quietly, his expression momentarily somber as he remembered those lost along the way. But we're carrying their contributions forward. The reminder sobered the reunion. The M8's journey from prototype to combat-proven weapon had not come without cost. Men had died testing its capabilities, discovering its limitations, proving its worth in the crucible of combat. Their sacrifices gave special meaning to the work now before them. What we learned with the M8 will save lives, Harrington said, addressing the unspoken emotion in the room. Every improvement we make, every lesson we apply to the next generation, means American crews facing German Panthers and Tigers will have better odds of coming home. The team settled into serious discussion, reviewing combat reports, examining failure analyses, debating design priorities. The work was technical yet deeply human. Each decision weighed not just for engineering elegance, but for its potential impact on young Americans operating these machines under fire. Late that evening, as the others departed for dinner, Harrington found himself alone in the hangar with the battle-scarred M8 that had started it all. In the quiet space, memories echoed: the initial skepticism, the desperate innovations, the triumphant demonstration, the terrifying combat debut in North African sands, the night raid through Italian mountains. Quite a journey, came Doc Thompson's voice from behind him. The old sergeant approached, his limp more pronounced than Harrington remembered. From ugly duckling to war hero. I was just thinking the same thing, Harrington admitted. Hard to believe how far it's come from that first day when you and Miller were trying to convince me it wasn't a death trap. Oh, it was definitely a death trap, Doc chuckled, patting the hull affectionately. But so was every other vehicle on the battlefield. At least this one gave you a fighting chance if you used it right. He studied Harrington with shrewd eyes. You did good by it, you know. Some officers would have walked away when the brass wanted to cancel the program. You believed in it when nobody else did. I believed in the men working on it, Harrington corrected. You, Miller, Washington, the whole team. The machine was just metal and machinery. It was the people who made it work. Doc nodded thoughtfully. That's always the way, isn't it? In the end, it's not about the tanks or the guns or the fancy technology. It's about the men who use them, who adapt, who overcome. He glanced around the cavernous hangar, now filled with new prototypes and testing equipment. And now we get to do it all again. Apply what we learned, make something better for the next group of young men heading over there. The observation captured perfectly what had drawn Harrington back to Aberdeen. The Hell Kitten's greatest legacy wasn't the vehicle itself, but the approach it represented. Innovation driven by necessity, adaptation informed by experience, theory tested and refined in the harshest conditions imaginable. We should join the others, Harrington suggested, turning from the M8 with a sense of completion rather than departure. There's still a war to win, and we've got work to do. Together, the officer and the sergeant walked from the hangar, leaving the battle-scarred Hell Kitten to its well-earned rest, its contribution to history secure not just in the tanks it had destroyed or the ground it had helped capture, but in the lessons it had taught and the innovations it had inspired. From unlikely beginnings had come remarkable achievements, proving once again that American ingenuity, when combined with courage and determination, could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Aberdeen Tank Museum, Maryland, 1997. And that's the rest of the story, the elderly Harrington concluded, his hand resting lightly on the preserved M8 Hell Kitten. The M18 Hellcat that followed incorporated everything we learned from this little machine. Faster, more powerful gun, purpose-built rather than adapted. But it all started here, with a desperate gamble during our darkest days. Jimmy, his eyes wide with newfound appreciation, reached out tentatively to touch the olive-drab hull. Did you ever go back to Europe, Grandpa, after you came home to Aberdeen? No, Harrington shook his head. My work continued here, designing and improving the vehicles our men needed. The M18 entered service just in time for the final push into Germany. By all accounts, it performed admirably. What happened to your team, Washington and the others? A shadow of old grief crossed Harrington's weathered features. Not all of them made it through the war. O'Connor was killed during a test firing accident in '44. A prototype shell detonated prematurely. He paused, the memory still painful after all these years. Washington survived, went on to become an engineer with General Motors after the war. We stayed in touch until his passing in '83. Doc Thompson lived to the ripe old age of 92, ornery to the end. The museum around them had grown quieter as closing time approached, most visitors having departed. In the hushed atmosphere, with late afternoon sunlight slanting through high windows, the tanks and armored vehicles seemed almost alive, as if waiting for crews that would never return. The funny thing about war, Harrington continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality, is that it brings out both the worst and the best in people. The Hell Kitten existed because of humanity's capacity for destruction, but it succeeded because of our capacity for innovation, adaptation, courage. He guided his grandson toward a display case containing photographs and documents related to the M8 program. One image showed a younger Harrington standing proudly beside his crew in North Africa, dust-covered and weary, but unmistakably triumphant after their first successful engagement with German armor. The real story isn't about the machine, Jimmy. It's about the men who created it, who believed in it when the odds were against them, who learned to use it in ways no one had imagined. Harrington's eyes grew distant, seeing across decades to those desperate, dangerous, remarkable days. We were just ordinary Americans thrust into extraordinary circumstances, doing what needed to be done with whatever tools we had available. Jimmy studied his grandfather with new understanding, seeing beyond the familiar elderly man to the young officer who had helped change the course of a world war through persistence, ingenuity, and courage. "Is that why you wanted to show me this today?" the boy asked. "To tell me about the Hell Kitten?" Harrington smiled gently. "Partly, but mostly to share something I learned from this experience, something I've carried with me all these years." He placed his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "When faced with seemingly impossible challenges, remember this: it's not always the biggest or strongest that prevail, but those who adapt, who innovate, who refuse to accept defeat as inevitable." He gazed once more at the modest vehicle that had played such a pivotal role in his life. "The Hell Kitten taught me that limitations can become advantages if viewed from the right perspective, that apparent weaknesses can be transformed into unexpected strengths, that with courage, determination, and ingenuity, even the smallest combatant can change the course of battle." As they turned to leave, Harrington paused for a final moment with the machine that had shaped his life's trajectory. "Thank you, old friend," he whispered, too softly for his grandson to hear, "for the lessons, for the legacy, for bringing me home when so many didn't make it back." Outside, the setting sun bathed the Maryland landscape in golden light as the elderly veteran and the young boy walked together toward the parking lot, connected by blood and now by shared understanding of how ordinary people, rising to extraordinary challenges, can change the course of history with unexpected tools and unwavering determination. Behind them in the quiet museum, the M8 Hell Kitten maintained its vigilant watch, its battle scars and combat history preserved for future generations to discover, a testament to American ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds, and a reminder that even the smallest, most unlikely weapons can leave an outsized legacy when placed in the hands of those who refuse to accept defeat as an option.